today I have figured out which insulin pump is the best for my situation. And this will give good context and insight for you if you are considering an insulin pump, if you are considering changing the system that you're on, if you are content with the system that you're on, or if you're thinking, hey, no, I just want to change or see if what I'm doing is the best situation. And so with this, welcome to the Your Diabetes Insider podcast, where we take all of the mysteries of blood sugar control, focusing on nutrition, exercise, and any of the other 40 plus factors that may impact your blood sugar. If you don't know me, my name is Ben Zeal. I'm a registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, strength and conditioning coach, and I've lived myself with type 1 diabetes for over 20 years. And I am here to share everything that I have learned in both my personal and professional experience so you can live that incredible diabetes life. So get ready and let's dive right into today's episode. What is going on? Welcome to this episode of the Your Diabetes Insider podcast. And today I have a very important announcement to make. And that announcement would be, I have figured out which insulin pump is the best for my situation. And this will give good context and insight for you if you are considering an insulin pump, if you are considering changing the system that you're on, if you are content with the system that you're on, or if you're thinking, hey, no, I just want to change or see if what I'm doing is the best situation. And so with this, you may know I, about a year ago, got the DIY loop, the loop GitHub website, all that. I got the loop to use with the Omnipod Dash. And I was a little uncertain. And the reason I was uncertain, and this is, this may come as news, this may not come as news, depending on how well you know me, but I completely rejected Control IQ. When it initially came out, I got Control IQ on my pump. I was super excited for it. I've been using Basal IQ. I remember seeing, oh, this is so amazing. It'll give me little doses and it'll help keep me in range. And I spent 5 days on it. And in those 5 days, my average blood sugar was 180. It was right around the time COVID hit. I was not excited about it at all. And I went back to manual mode and said, you know what? I am controlling better in manual mode. I trust myself in manual mode. I will stay in manual mode. And don't get me wrong, from that point forward, tons of patients came through the practice, all on Control IQ. I have a lot greater of a sense now, of course, versus 5+ years ago of how to use Control IQ. And I know all the nuances. I know all the idiosyncrasies. And it definitely is one of the better ones on the market. I will say, if you are on an insulin pump and you are on Tandem, you are on Control IQ, you are probably on the best commercially available algorithm that exists. Medtronic is up there in terms of algorithm, but I've got my own beef with Medtronic, namely the 3-inch scar that's still on my side from 11 years ago. And then there's the Omnipod 5, which I personally think is a little too conservative. But I ended up switching to the Omnipod about 18 months ago. It was a little bit less than 18 months ago, because I was just so sick of having issues with the sites from Tandem. And I'm not going to say that everything's been sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns on the Omnipod. For me, I think I just have a lot of scar tissue. I've had diabetes for over 25 years. That's just going to be part of the game. However, I absolutely love this DIY loop, and I love the algorithm, and I love what it stands for and what it does. And just for perspective, in case you are not sure what I am even talking about, there is an open source project, loop.github.io, if you want interested in looking at a little bit more about it. And the big thing with it is it's an algorithm. And I personally think it is the algorithm that the other pumps could do, but aren't doing. It's more aggressive than your Control IQ, than your Omnipod 5. It allows more customization and has other features that are absolutely incredible. So I know I did a previous episode on this a while back, but as a quick refresher, in a nutshell, if I literally open it up right now, it will tell me right now, what it expects my blood sugar to be in the next few hours, but I'm talking about the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 hours are on here. It'll tell me active insulin, how my active insulin's falling off, when I took my doses, obviously how much each dose was, auto corrections versus not. It has your active carbohydrates. But one of the beautiful things about it that I really love, besides the fact that you can set an override. So let's say, you're really insulin resistant, you're sick, or you didn't sleep well, or if you're a woman, you're on your period. Suddenly you can set an override to just make everything increase by a certain percentage. You need a 40% override, boom, you've got it. You need a 20% override, boom, you've got it. You only want to set it for a few hours, you've got it. And of course, you can always open the loop, meaning that you can make it so you're controlling it in manual mode. So there's no adjustments to your basal, there's no auto corrections, none of that. but at the same time, you have that option as well, which is beautiful. So you can use it in manual mode effectively. You can let the algorithm do its thing. Its algorithm's a bit more aggressive. Is there some finessing? Sure. But here's some reasons why I love it and some of the absolute best parts about this system. And I'm not telling you to go out and run and grab it, but it's something you should know about if you have an Omnipod Dash or if you are someone who has one of the Medtronic pumps that it's compatible with. So first thing, it is more than aggressive enough to work with what you need it to do. And so the big thing here is, like I mentioned before, comparing it to an Omnipod 5 or a Control-IQ. Omnipod 5, from what I've seen with patients, is it will work. It will bring your blood sugar down. Your blood sugar, I'm making up a number, let's say it's 220 and it's overnight and needs to come down. You may wake up in range, but it will take its sweet time to bring you down. It is very conservative, and that's okay. That's what we want, right? Especially if it's a kid that's wearing it, if it's someone who may be hypo-unaware, you want it to be relatively conservative. But the Omnipod 5 is really conservative. Like, it is very painfully slow at times. And you want to correct, but it's just not doing it. Control-IQ, a lot better. But with the Loop, what's really nice about it is, yes, its algorithm just appears a little bit more aggressive, and it will adjust. Of course, you can adjust with basal adjustments, you can adjust with small corrections, but it will adjust over time. And I think one of the biggest components that makes it have an advantage is there's different food dosing. What I mean by that is, you go to dose, right? Let's say you go to dose and you're on Tandem. You go to type in your carb, you type in 25 grams of carbs. You are just typing in 25 grams of carbs. Carbs are carbs are carbs. On this particular device, you have options to type in, they give you 3 defaults and you can pick your own, but lollipop, taco, or pizza. Lollipop is very fast acting carbs. Think candy, think dessert. Your taco is more of your typical standard meal, right? Think of an average lunch or an average dinner. And then your pizza is like a pizza type meal. It's going to be a higher fat kind of meal that's going to kick in hours after the fact. And why this matters, if you think about it, is you're not necessarily trying to nail everything perfectly, especially with the pizza, right? You're trying to nail the dose for the carbs. Okay, hey, I'm eating 35 grams of carbs. I dose for 35. I'm good. But the difference is with this device is it will tell you as the carbs are absorbed, how long it took for them to get absorbed, etc. But in the event that you're off, you've pretty much primed the system. So in this particular case, let's say, you have a high fat meal, you include the dosing for the fat, and let's just say you were off by 20 grams and it's overnight. While you're sleeping, it will dose you little by little, and it will tell you the next morning you took for 20 grams, you were off by 25, but it dosed you for 45. So let me say that again slower. You thought it was only 20 grams worth of, the extra dose for the fat or whatever you want to call it in that case, and you wake up and it says 45 grams absorbed, but you only took for 20 because it's dosing you a little bit extra based on what you actually needed for that meal, which is amazing. So in this case, right, I am huge and one of the top things that our team works with people on are those high fat, high carb meals, right? You go out to a restaurant, you have pizza, you have pasta, you have a dessert. This has a built-in thing to help with that. So instead of just dosing, I took my dose, when I saw the fat hit, I took the dose and kept my blood sugar from going up like crazy. You are now pretty much priming the pathway to say, hey, there's a high fat meal coming. You may need to dose more, priming it, letting it know, on top of giving some insulin for what you actually need to make sure that secondary rise does not happen. That to me is just remarkable. It is incredible. It's probably my favorite feature of the actual device because you pretty much are giving it guide rails and giving it a backdrop. So it knows high fat meal incoming. Let me make sure that I'm dosing appropriately, even if you are not acutely aware of it right now, even if you're asleep. And does that mean that I never wake up the way I would, doing manual mode on Tandem to make sure I'm taking the rest of my fat dose? Of course, I'm still waking up to make sure I'm getting the appropriate amount of insulin, but I also can rest assured that I have a pretty aggressive safety net. I have a pretty aggressive backup source that's going to have my back in case I do stay sleeping. So maybe, God forbid, I sleep through the alarm. Instead of waking up at 270, I can wake up at 170 or wake up at 155. It isn't perfect, but it's a heck of a lot better than the alternative. So keep that in mind. Another thing I absolutely love about this thing is the user interface. And again, everybody's different. You get looking at it here, right? I'm making an adjustment as we speak, but the user interface is magnificent. Like, it's super easy. You can see where your blood sugar is. It will literally tell you where you'll eventually be, right? So it'll show you the whole graph on the way down, and then it'll show you as you get it back into range. It's just so convenient and simple. You can change your therapy settings, which I think is huge because, again, Tandem, you can change your basal rates. You can change your boluses. Omnipod 5, you don't know what your basal rates are. You set them in as the initial basal rates, and it becomes this effective black box where you have to then dive into the actual nitty-gritty data to calculate what your basal rates are. And I'm not going to say that's a problem, but it's not super convenient, if I'm being honest. It's a lot easier to know, hey, my basal rates are this, my boluses are this. And if I'm noticing every single day that it keeps elevating my basal or vice versa, or decreasing it, it's probably time to change it. The user interface is super easy. I was able to pick this up super quick. And I'm not going to say I'm, not great with technology, but I'm not always the best with technology or wanting to adopt some of these things right away. And in this case, it was super straightforward. And I'm not going to lie too, like every year you have to update the software. So it'll say, hey, you have 364 days remaining. And then when you start getting down into the, 10 days, 12 days, you have to rebuild the platform, right? You're rebuilding the loop. I'm going to be straight up. When I was initially taught how to use this thing, I had someone walk me through the process. So I had help. And so I was like, okay, this is great. And then I realized at some point, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have to redo this and rebuild this myself. And I was able to do it without any issue. Over the weekend, I said, hey, I'm going to spend 20, 25 minutes. I'm going to build this thing. And it went great. And I was able to figure it out. So the directions are super easy. The user interface is super easy. Yes, there's some little idiosyncratic things that you have to make sure that you're looking into, like how to appropriately use the pizza emoji dosing to, build those guide rails for the fat. But at the same time, once you're used to the system, it's fantastic. Like I have seen people's control with this thing. I have seen people averaging 105, 110. Their bad weeks, I'm using air quotes, are, a 122 with a 90% time and range. It is insane what is capable of happening with this particular setup. And I mean, even one patient I had, he was great prior to using the loop. Like he was absolutely phenomenal. He was averaging, 127, 130, and, pretty good time and range. And even on this thing, like he was like, oh, you're using that, I want to check it out. He goes and tries it out with his care team and then comes back to me and says, hey, I'm averaging 122 without a problem. And this guy's eating out all the time. He's working out 5 to 6 days a week. He's super active. He's eating big meals. Like you can do a lot of amazing things with this. And I feel like what's also really convenient too, like I mentioned earlier, is the overrides. You don't have to have 10 profiles set up. Like some people, for example, they may have on their Tandem, they may have, hey, I've got my, my normal settings. I've got my sick day settings. I've got my, I'm being really active settings. I've got my, if you're a woman, I've got my menstrual cycle settings. You have a bunch of different settings you have to keep track of. On this, you just need to override. Hey, I need a 20% override. Bloop, done for the next 24 hours. So that is super convenient as well. Now, what I will say is there's always going to be drawbacks, right? Nothing is going to be perfect. Nothing's going to be absolutely the most amazing system in the whole wide world. So a couple things I have noticed that have been a little bit difficult. One, I still have had some site issues. And I think that's more of a Ben problem than it is a user problem, because I have had scar tissue issues and just issues in general with sites for dating back years. Could be because I'm leaner, could be because I don't have as much real estate to put the sites, could be just because of 25 plus years of diabetes and scar tissue adds up. But I have had times where I put in the site and then I know the site's not good. I pull it out, it's bleeding, it's not absorbing. So in a case like that, no, that can happen still. It's still an Omnipod. It can absolutely happen. The other thing with that though, that I have learned gratefully is you can pull the insulin out. I know people said, oh, you can pull out the insulin from the pod. And I couldn't figure it out for the life of me. I started figuring out finally, if you tilt the pod just a little bit more than normal, you're able to pull out at least 75% of it. So that makes me feel a little bit better, because there were a couple times where I'd go through 3 pods trying to get a good one. I'd be like, cool, I just killed half a bottle of insulin. I can't do that. That's not okay. So know that there can still be issues with sites, but again, it's probably a Ben thing. Another thing is sometimes it almost works too well when you're about to be active if you don't inform it. So way early on, I had just gotten used to it. I had probably been on it for 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. This is almost a year ago. And everything was pretty good. I was starting to get adjusted to it. And I decided I was going to go kayaking with Amelia. And, typical for a pre-workout, hey, I'm going to make sure that I'm having a pre-workout snack. I'm going to make sure that everything's set up for my blood sugars. And I'd been so used to being on manual mode that I knew, okay, cool, I'm going to have this snack. I think I had like 12 grams of carbs. Not a big deal, 20, 25 minutes before. So it's going to start to hit. I'll go work out, I'll go kayak, it'll flatten out and I'll come back and I'll be, 110 when I'm done. Problem was I didn't realize, because I wasn't used to being on a, looped algorithm system, that it will dose you when it starts seeing you going up. And it did not know I was going to be in activity mode of any sort. So it started dosing me because it saw my number was going up. So suddenly the entire situation I had tried to avoid of minimal active insulin, a little bit extra carbs in my system, it now has active insulin that is going to potentiate and get stronger while I am kayaking. So needless to say, on that particular day, I ended up having to have a bunch of extra snacks just for the sake of keeping my blood sugar from falling off a cliff, which was frustrating, but the loop did its job. So sometimes it almost works a little too well. Another thing I don't always love is if you're having a stubborn higher blood sugar, or if let's say you had a site that didn't go well necessarily, and you took insulin from it, there's times where your blood sugar could be 270 and it turns your basal down because it thinks you have too much active insulin on board, even though your number is just stubborn and flat. And you may have not even gotten that previous insulin. So there's times you still do have to do some overrides of the system to make sure it's working well for you. But what I will say is it does a very good job of most mornings I'm waking up between 80 and 92. And that's not an exaggeration. It is a beautiful thing when it comes to that. And again, none of these numbers are non-replicable with other devices. Like you can be on Control IQ. I've seen people on Control IQ averaging 118, 122, 121, doing amazing with it. But I think it just goes to show that this device may have a little bit of an extra edge. Now, again, you can't do an extended bolus on this, but you don't really need to, because anytime you would consider extending would likely be a pizza dose. So you pretty much just replace the extend feature with a pizza dose. Now, is that somewhat annoying? It can be, depending on who you ask, depending on who you talk to, depending on your situation, but you can typically work around that. And then one other thing that I've noticed, and again, this could be, again, a Ben thing more than anything else, but downloading data. So like for Tandem, you can go onto T-Connect and you can download your data from your pump. I have not figured out how to download the data on this thing. And it's probably me just going into the files on GitHub and saying, hey, this is how to do it. This is what I got to do, etc. But I haven't figured it out yet. What I can say is, of course, like I would for a patient, look at the Dexcom data and be able to make decisions based on that is going to be likely the best route anyway. But sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of extra data or blood sugars overlaid. And I'm pretty sure Tidepool link with this as well. And I don't use Tidepool, so very well that could be it. So at the end of the day, the biggest things to recognize are the user interface is clean. It's very easy. It's a more aggressive version of what's out there commercially. And it can work really well between the different types of dosing for, hey, I'm having some candy, let me dose it so it hits really quickly versus, hey, I'm going to have, a mixed meal versus, hey, I'm going to go have a really high fat meal where I'm going to adjust for carbs now and have to adjust for carbs later. It's a finessing of the process, but I have still gone to all of our favorite restaurants and then other places and said, I'm going to eat this, I'm going to figure this out, and been able to do it. It did take a little bit, I will say, even as someone who works in the space. It took a little bit, but that learning curve, once I got through it, it really wasn't that huge. And I'm like, okay, this thing's amazing. So the one thing I'll say is I've traveled internationally on it. I've gone in the water with it. I'm very grateful. Like it's been very good. When it works, it is amazing. But I feel like that's the case with any pump. So that is my exciting update on that. I will say I prefer it given just the tubeless nature, but I prefer the algorithm over the other that are out there. I'm sure there will be an update to Control IQ. I'm sure there will be an update to the Omnipod 5 and then other pump products in the future that will ideally start to mimic this more or be a little more aggressive. But at the same time, I found this to be best for me personally. Of course, consult with your care team if you want to consider something like the loop. Look into it some more, do some more research. Happy to answer questions. I've had at this point, I think at least half a dozen patients who have used the loop with success and have had amazing blood sugar. So it's definitely a viable option. But at the end of the day, if you're like, hey, I love my pump, I don't want to change, stick with what you love and what is working for you. If you're thinking, hey, I want to try something a little bit different, it's also helpful to have another potential option in the arsenal as a person with diabetes to help you achieve better control. So that's all I got for you on this one. I hope you enjoyed this episode about the loop and what is amazing about it. So let me know. Like I said, if you have questions, reach out to me on social media, Instagram, TikTok, at manofzl, MANOFTZL. If you're like, hey, I want better blood sugars, I know that you guys can help me. My team and I all live with type 1. We all are dietitians. We all have exercise backgrounds, and we are here to help support you have the best blood sugars in your life and lose weight, get stronger, and eat incredible food. So if that's you, message me on those platforms or go to yourdiabetesinsider.com. And if you're loving the pod, I would love if you dropped us a 5-star rating wherever you are listening, Apple, Spotify, wherever. It would mean the world to me. But with that, I appreciate you, and I will catch you in the next episode.
Hope you're ready for the next episode. Hey.